looking at the tree, and they called it a Douglas fir, right? And then they said, oh, it doesn't follow the rules, so it's a fake fir.
Pseudotsuga.
And so then, but they said, oh, well, it's not a fir then. It's a hemlock, because hemlock's cones hang from underneath. So they said it was a hemlock, and then they started looking at it as a hemlock, and it doesn't have all the same features as a hemlock, all the same characteristics. It doesn't have the same characteristics as a hemlock. So they named it Pseudotsuga. Suga is hemlock. They named it false hemlock. Pseudotsuga manzesii was the guy that discovered this. So Pseudotsuga manzesii. This is Pseudotsuga manzesii. It's a lot easier to say Doug. This is Doug, or Douglas. Their cones are really cool. Did I step on your tail? I'm sorry.
Instead of giving it its own species name, they just
It gave it its
gave
own
it a
genus
contrary
and
from
species
others.
all by itself. It is the only one in it.
Only one.
Yeah. And they're all the same. Except there are some like subspecies because some are grow bigger than others and stuff.
So Suga means hemlock? Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, go look at, if you look at your hemlocks, that will be their genus name. Now, this one's, oh, there's one. There's a good one. I'm going to tell you a story that I tell all the kids. Douglas fir cone. To remember a Douglas fir cone. The Great Spirit one day was sitting underneath a Douglas fir tree trying to read a book. And there were these mice, and they were bugging him. They were running up his pant legs and up his sleeves and running around his chest, playing with chest hairs and playing with his hair and just bugging the heck out of him. And he said, he finally yelled, "Enough! Go away!" And they all disappeared because you don't want to get the Great Spirit mad at you because you may not exist anymore. And they all hid. And he finished reading his book and he looked up in the Douglas fir tree. And under the scales of, these are scales of the cone, he saw 2 hind feet, if I can get one out, 2 hind feet and a tail. 2 hind feet and a tail sticking out.
Oh.
2 hind feet and a tail. And from then on, all Douglas fir cones have 2 hind feet and a tail sticking out from the scales. And that's how you tell a Douglas fir cone from any other cone. And there are no other cones that have 2 hind feet and a tail. There are some that have tails, but no other one have 2 hind feet and a tail. So a Douglas fir cone always has 2 hind feet and a tail. So if you see this cone, you have a Douglas fir somewhere. Now, you can't go under a tree and expect to find the cone to the tree, because look what's under this tree. If you're going to try to guess the tree species by the cone underneath it, you probably have about a 80% chance of failing the test. So, unless you see the cone in the tree, you don't know where the cone belongs, for the most part. Unless you have a pure stand of lodgepole, or a pure stand of ponderosa, or a pure stand of grand fir, or a pure stand. Well, you aren't going to find grand fir cones on the ground. Pure stand of Douglas fir. So there's just 2 fine feet and a tail. They again have male cones that are really small. They're only about this tall. And they'll pollinate too at a different time this spring. Bark. Douglas fir bark. Thick? Pretty thick. Douglas fir is kind of a weird tree. It is somewhat shade tolerant, but it's seedlings. But its seedlings will also grow in more sun than the grand firs will. So he's kind of in between. He has very thick bark on the mature tree, and as you can see before our samples get moved, he had branches all the way down to here. So they don't prune up really fast. They prune up slower. They will have a few branches underneath. And so once in a while you'll find one with branches all the way to the ground. He's in a really wet area and gets a lot of sun. But they do self-prune as they get older. He has very thick bark, and his bark is corky. see the cork to his bark, and you can stick your fingernail right in it. So it's very corky.
Kind of layered.
Protects the tree. Douglas fir, if they're mature, when they're this age, this bark is as thin as that lodgepole, and it'll just go. But when it gets to be the big old trees that have self-pruned a little bit, they will survive fire too, a ground fire. And they'll grow in association with ponderosa, western larch, very often. They also, every once in a while, in certain places, you get true stands that are all Doug fir, and they grow in the weirdest little canyons. I've seen them in Colorado, I've seen them in Idaho, I've seen them in Utah, and they will grow in these little canyons, and it'll be almost all pure Douglas fir. And it'll be kind of a dry climate where you associate Douglas fir with more moisture for the most part, because this tree also grows on the coast right up to the ocean where it's super wet. So this tree has a huge range, even bigger than the ponderosa, because the ponderosa likes dry. When it gets too wet, it's not going to grow anymore. But these guys will grow lots of places. This is also the lumber species of Idaho, other than white pine. And probably, since there's more of this is probably more that we're cutting than anything else. And it's also called, by the loggers, red fir, because its wood has a reddish cast to it. And some of it is really red, and some of it's just kind of red, and it'll have red stripes through it, if nothing else. So this is your major lumber, and this is what you use for dimensional lumber, for your studs, for your 2x4s, your 2x6s, your 2x8s. This is the tree you're using. And then they also found that it makes great plywood. You can strip this and take it off in long sheets and make your plywood out of it. So that's what this tree is used for. And when I lived in Oregon, in Roseburg, Oregon, there were still Douglas fir that were so big that there would be one log on a truck. That was it. It was so huge. I couldn't believe that old Douglas fir that was along the Oregon coast. It was huge, huge trees.
So we call the grand fir white fir, but white fir and grand fir really are two different species.
There are two different species, but the loggers call it white fir because of the white color of it.
But if you go to California, you know, by Lake Tahoe, there really are white.
There are really white fir. There are really white fir closer to the coast. Yeah. There's also silver fir and a whole bunch of firs that I really can get to over there. Noble firs. It's a lot easier over here.
That was a argument.
So,
With a bar fight down in
what
the
else
middle.
do I need to talk about?
Yeah, so I was working at
This grows pretty well at middle elevations.
And goes as far as the coast, low as the coast. It won't go really, really high. When you get really high, it won't be there. It likes it a little warmer. Veneer plywood. Grouse, deer, and elk eat the foliage on these trees. Especially in the winter. So let's put this away and get out my other tree.
Its limbs want to kind of lift up. What I remember, right?
Huh?
Its limbs want to be out or up.
Yeah, and if you look at the
Gram
picture,
fir down a little bit.
the Doug fir, they kind of go out, and see how they kind of go up. And that one behind it is a bigger Doug fir.
Yep.
See how they go up, and they reach up.
I can't tell from it. Okay, so what about this one
Oh,
right?
they do go up.
That's a Doug fir too.
And then
See
this
how
one
it's going up.
goes
That
out.
one tends to
reaching
go
like
out
this.
and
Uh-huh.
shoot a little
Yeah.
bit.
Going like
But
this.
so if it's a grand
But that's not
fir
always-
would be more.
Oh, that's a problem.
Okay. Here's a grand fir right here.
Whenever I think I got it figured out, I'm like,
The Rapid River. You know, when you walk up
Yeah.
that trail.
I get to pay more attention.
Oh,
It wants to sweep out like this.
You might think I paid attention.
And it wants to sweep out. And if you look at it from the side, especially towards the bottom,
Looks
you
like
see how it does almost layers of green, layers, layers, And grand fir does a layered look, especially at the lower part. See how the lower part, it almost has straight layers across? And the Doug's gonna go,
So this one,
this is a grand.
that's a grand.
Yeah.
Oh, you can tell because of the little branches.
And there's the Doug. You see how he's going? He's reaching out and up.
But almost looking at the top of the tree, you can't really tell that it's
No, the top of the
going
trees
out.
are usually just looking for sun. You have to remember the tops are looking for sun. And but it's when you get lower that you can tell from the distance. And the Doug is probably a little more conical at the top than the grand, but not always, because that's the grand over there. That grand is really layered. You really do the layers, especially down the bottom here, where the holes are.
The one, okay, so which one are you talking
This
about?
closest one right here, that little one.
Oh, that's this one right here.
Yeah. So,
You know.
okay, got that. Neat in the understory, it's almost all grand fir. They're taking, they're trying to take over. Except for this guy. You look at top of him, first thing you notice is he's really tall. And his first branches that's alive is way up there. But what's missing from his branches?
The leaves, the needles.
The needles. There's no needles. Because all those needles are here on the ground. This is your only deciduous conifer. The Larxus family has the only deciduous conifers. All the other ones are evergreens. This one is a deciduous tree, which means you lose your leaves or needles. Now,
Yeah, Che always says this is the best one to get because there's no branches to cut. For firewood.
oh yeah, but you have to make sure you wait. You can't cut a larch in the late fall, winter, or spring, because if you cut a live tree, they charge you triple stumpage. So that's triple what that log is worth. That tree is worth in the at a mill. So triple the price of a log. Get really expensive real fast. That's what the
Unless it's on private property.
yeah. But do you really want to cut a live tree down?
No.
No. So you want to cut them in the winter. I mean in the summer.
Summer, so you know that
So you know
they're
it's
dead.
alive.
You
So
can't
you know
tell
it's dead.
really.
Live.
I mean, that's a good question.
So if you go to your key and you look at multiples, we talked about all the pines, and this is the only other one that has multiples besides the pines. And they are in bundles of what? What does it say? It says mini, because they're somewhere between 17 and 23 needles in a bundle on a western larch. So they don't. So I don't know about you, but I really don't have time to count
Needles.
17 to 20.
More than 5.
You didn't say how many
Right.
words.
So many words. So if you look at on page 13, you'll get to see what it looks like, and in about a month we'll get to see what the needles look like on these
Actually
trees.
says 14 to 30.
Yeah, different books say. Got lost while they were counting. So, first thing you'll notice about this tree, okay, besides that it has no needles, when they do have bunches, they're really bunchy and they almost look like little poofs of down feathers. They're very soft needles. When you pick up the fine ones off the ground, they're very small, they're very thin, and they're very soft. You can just roll them up like pieces of grass. You have probably less consistency than grass. The needles will come out of these little knobs on the branch. So this is where all the needles will come. The cones, remember we said there are some with just tails? Well, this is one. There's a scale and a tail. That's a larch cone, western larch cone. It's Larchus occidentalis, and people call it tamarack. But really, this tree grows to be 100 to 160 feet tall. A true tamarack only grows to be 60 to 80 feet tall. A true tamarack lives around the Great Lakes and in Canada. But you have to remember, the loggers came from east to west. So they saw this tree, and they, oh, a tamarack! Boy, that's a big tamarack. Yeah, but it's really Larchus occidentalis instead of Larchus tamaracea, I think. Is it tamarack?
And
So I always call it like,
Larchus occidentalis
I always,
does last 500 years?
Mhm.
Oh.
They live a really long time.
Huh.
And if you want to see some, there's one really big one left at North Beach, but the top got broken off years ago. So when they logged that all in 1920 and took all the big larch out, and you'll still see stumps this tall, and they're huge around.
Oh, right.
That one, it takes about 3 people to reach around that tree up there. Because its top was broken off, it's probably saved it from being logged. The top blew out. But they'll grow forever, and they get really large. And that's occidentalis, but tamaracea doesn't do that. Did you notice it's self-limbing? It does a great job at limbing. Its limbs are really brittle. So if you lose your needles and you live in a heavy snow climate, and your limbs are this brittle, what's the advantage of losing your needles? Have a lot of snow. You don't have a snow load. Basically, your needles will hold the snow on the trees. So if you don't have any needles, it's going to go right through. So that's your advantage to losing your needles, especially when you have clumps that are really thick like this. If you lose them, hey, and you have brittle branches, you can survive. Okay, the bark.
Have you heard the name hackmatack for tamarack?
Huh?
You heard the name hackmatack?
Hackmatack?
It's just another name. I don't know if it's from European tamaracks or what, but
They have
boat building woods.
They have Larxus in Italy, because we saw it there.
Oh.
I don't know which species it was. I didn't have any way of getting to the Cutamus Key.
Yeah.
Wow. And the foresters we were talking to, we had very little. They didn't speak any English. We didn't speak any Italian. All we know, the reason we know is Larxus, because we started talking Latin. And when we said Larxus, they're like, yeah, those trees. And I'm like, yeah. And then I told them we have Larxus occidentalis, and I think they told me what they have, but I don't.
You knew.
Very well.
Tamarack.
So, they didn't say tamarack. So, here's the bark. Again, very, very thick bark. So this bark, it doesn't burn well. It's somewhat fire retardant. It's very thick, so it protects that cambium layer. What is really cool about western larch is, since it loses its needles anyhow, if it just burns its needles and doesn't get hot enough to cook the cambium layer, you won't consider the tree dead until the next year, because lots of times they'll flush after fire and still have new needles because they're used to losing their needles. So losing their needles isn't a big thing to the tree. So it doesn't go into freak mode, ah, I'm dead. So
How do you tell if it's dead or not?
you can tell.
I mean, if it's when the leaves
Wait.
are off. I mean, you look
Wait
up
till
at that. Is there a way?
you have to wait till
Summer.
it
You just have to wait and see
You
what
have
leaves come out,
until
and, or
summer.
until it's
Yeah.
clearly
Also, if they have long branches coming out like this,
at the top.
that's a pretty healthy tree. And you'll see a lot. The biggest disease that these guys die from is mistletoe, larch mistletoe,
right,
and it stunts their branches, so their branches only come out from the bark about this far, and those are usually the ones that are going to die, because finally the mistletoe will get into
Sounds
the
like
main
you
bowl
need
and
to
kill it.
identify them in the summer. And
Yeah. So, anyhow, so it's very thick, and yeah, they don't consider larch dead until after a fire until the next year, because lots of times they'll come back, and that'll be your only tree that'll come back if it was a crown fire. They like mountain slopes, valleys, gravelly, sandy, loamy soil. There's lots of them at North Beach. They love that river bottom down there. For wood, they are great for utility poles because they don't rot. They're almost as rot resistant as redwood, but not quite. They do not rot. They use them for post and pole timber. They use them for fences. They also split really well in straight planes like this. When you go to split the wood, it splits in nice straight planes. So they used to use them for shake shingles when they used to put shake shingles on houses. And the original settlers of this area used them for that. They used them for railroad ties because they don't rot. That's where they had cut all those ones in 1920. Brown's tie and lumber and tie. Yeah, lumber and tie. And they were making railroad ties for the railroad to come up here. And they cut all those trees at North Beach at that time. So, really neat tree. For the locals, it is one of their favorite firewood species other than red fir because they burn long, have very little ash, they burn completely, but you basically need to take the bark off because the bark doesn't burn. As we said, it's somewhat fire resistant. They said they use it for panel. It says here that they used it for paneling. I have never seen large paneling ever, so I don't know if it's that very popular. I know they use them for shake shingles and firewood and split rail fences. They work for all those. One of my favorite trees. Anybody have anything to add?
Yeah, when I was my days as a jumper, talked about the brittleness. You didn't want to land in a tamarack because you could easily bust out of it.
Yeah.
But you can see when you're flying overhead, it's real obvious the color differences between the pines and firs and the tamarack.
It's such a bright
yeah,
lime green.
yeah.
Just
But you just didn't want to. You just didn't.